Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Break. Today we are celebrating the best of 2024 and what we three, think is the best of what we've read so far. I'm joined today by librarians Molly and Sean.
Hello.
Hello. And I know you keep track of what you read. What do you
Yes.
prefer, Goodreads or?
Well, I've been using Goodreads for, at least 12 or 14 years now, and it's the only way I can remember what I have read, because I read a lot. This year, I am up to 116 books, and I would just like to state that, contrary to popular belief, librarians do not read at work, so this
Right.
was all on my own time, to the detriment of housekeeping, hobbies, personal fitness, cooking. So yeah, I do keep track on Goodreads. Claire, you just introduced me to Storygraphs.
Right, yeah, I use both.
Yeah, because that compiles some nice statistics so I can find out, what genres I read and that, they're medium paced and sad and reflective.
Right.
So yeah, and it's not owned by Amazon. I think it's
Right.
Is it like a woman-owned business?
Yeah, it might be a female black-owned business, as a matter of fact, I
yeah.
think I've seen.
So Storygraphs, that was a cool site.
But I love the statistics, but I'm a nerd that way.
Yeah.
So, Sean, you just kind of go loosey-goosey and pick books and then...
I didn't think I would. I didn't think I would read enough to have to track it, but I think over the years, I might have to come up with something. Because I don't remember what I read this year, but I know I read. It looks like I read more than I thought I did because I had a hard time remembering what we were going to talk about today.
Right.
So that's.
Yeah. Yeah, I think next year I might even try to do a journal type thing, but I'm still out on the fence about that. A lot of times I'm real excited about something in the beginning and then kind of dive off,
New Year's resolutions.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I read 108, and that was a lot. But I read at least 25% audiobooks now, so that bumps up my total. Average rating 3.75, so I'm not I don't give out a lot of 5 stars anymore.
Oh, those are your ratings?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of my books are 3s at this point. It's like
Right.
I kept reading it. I didn't
Right.
fall asleep. I finished it, kept my interest. Was
Yeah.
it great? No.
Right.
So if I give something a 4 or a 5, it means I was into it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have a rating system. If I finish it, that means I liked it, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel compelled to finish anything I don't like anymore.
Yeah, I've never. It was advice from my mom. She said life's too short to finish a bad book. So,
Right.
And don't hold out for a good thing at the end because a good book should be good throughout.
Yeah.
You can always read the last chapter, see how it
Exactly.
wrapped up. I just did that with a book
Yep.
past week. I was like,
Meh.
yep.
All right. I will go first. My first book that I really liked and stood out for me that I'm still thinking about was The Foxwife by Yangtze Chu. This was a historical fantasy, folklore kind of mashup, and I talked about it probably early in the year. It was a story of China, foxes, but the foxes become real people, and multiple characters, very satisfying conclusion, and also it was set, the historical part, it was set in China in the early 1900s. So that to me was appealing because I'm always looking for historical fiction now that's a little bit different and not always the same thing. But I love the character. Her name was either Snow or Asan. She was a mysterious young woman on a very vengeful quest. I like vengeance too. Vengeful quest. She was looking for an older photographer who she blamed for the death of her young daughter. So, and then there's also little side stories in it with other people that are kind of like supporting characters and maybe a romance with an older character that was reunited. So very much, I would love to see it made into a TV series if they really did it well, but kind of dragged a little bit in the middle, but the ending was definitely worth the wait. So that was like one of my favorite kind of fantasy reads this year.
Does it like interweave a lot of the folklore
Yes.
into it?
Yes.
That seems to be a popular thing now.
Right. Yeah. And that was another thing, is a lot of the folklore, it'll be like characters you've already known or heard about, but this one, like the Chinese with the foxes and the people, they're kind of like tricksters. So they will lure like young, beautiful people in and then kind of suck the life out of them. But these foxes were good. I liked the girl fox. I thought she was quite noble. So,
That sounds interesting. I haven't read that one yet, but I've seen that talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
One of my favorites, also, it doesn't have quite as much folklore with it, but it does have some French Polynesian myths that is woven through it. It's called Playground by Richard Powers, and I had seen, quite a few positive reviews about it, and it has this really gorgeous cover with an ocean scene on it. And this book, it was pretty ambitious, but I thought it was done very well. It covered so many things, climate change, facts about the ocean, a lot of stuff about gaming, like both, through the ages, like chess and the game of Go. And then it got into virtual reality and the internet and artificial intelligence. And so this just covered so many different topics, and it centers on 4 characters, and it kind of goes back and forth between the past and the present. And the 4 characters, I was invested in all of them. There's a female scientist, an oceanographer. There are 2 best friends kind of from childhood who are very different. One came from kind of an impoverished background. He's a poet, and then he's becomes best friends in school with this computer genius. And of course, they fall for the same woman who's an artist. So these 4 people, and how their lives intersect throughout the years is kind of the basis of the story. But what I found interesting about this book was I love books that kind of get me both emotionally and intellectually. Like, I like to learn things, it's like a librarian thing, and look up things. So this book, because it was fiction, because it was talking about artificial intelligence, I wasn't quite sure when I read something, I'm like, is that real? Is that a real thing? So I was constantly Googling, like, it talks about seasteading and all these facts about the ocean, like, because it's such a huge part of the earth and we don't know all that much about it.
Right.
At one point it talks a lot about gaming, and it said the gaming industry is worth more than the film, TV, and music industry combined. And I was just like, no, that can't be it. So, I started Googling, and it's true. Yeah. But I thought this book was really well done. It kind of has a twist that, takes you back to flipping through earlier chapters to see, like, oh, how did that work? Like, so yeah, I thought it was good. I've never read anything by him before, but
Yeah.
I think he does like environmental.
Right. I was
things.
going to say, some people in my book group loved a book called The Overstory
Yeah.
by him.
Like that was the
And-
tree one, I think.
Yes,
This is
about-
the ocean one.
Right. But I really feel like I need to read something by him.
Yeah, I thought this one was good.
Yeah.
The setting is good as well. It takes place, part of it on a French Polynesian island where there's less than 100 residents, and that took me down like phosphate mining in the 1900s, which I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a very interesting book.
Huh.
And seasteading, like, that's a weird concept.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
It's kind of like they want to create islands on international waters where, there's no government.
Oh, got you.
It's almost like a utopia. And
Yeah.
sometimes
Oh, wow.
they're like,
Okay.
well, this is for environmental reasons, but it's also like for rich people so they can get out of
Oh,
taxes.
gotcha. I see.
And part of the book was the islanders trying to decide, are they going to become a home base for this billionaire tech company
This
to
sounds
do
really interesting,
seasteading?
Yeah.
And do
This
they
is
want to
giving
get
me
the
Sean vibes.
Yeah, do they want to get the economic benefits from having this be based off? It's a real island, Makatea.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Or do they want to maintain their current lifestyle. And
Did it-
this really, it was an option for them at one point.
Did
Again,
it give
I'm
you
Googling
any
and it's true.
tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow vibes with the gaming?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I did read that one and liked it. Yeah, but one of the characters, the computer genius, it's like how artificial intelligence kind of, came about. And again, I was like, oh, is it true that the AI can beat a human in the game of Go, which I guess they never thought was going to happen, but yeah, it's true.
Yeah, right.
It's a little bit scary and disturbing, but
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it does sound good. Where are you going to take us, Sean?
Oh, you want me to go?
Yeah.
No, I don't. Well, I have 3 today. So, and I think at least 2 of them we've talked about on this here podcast in the past. So maybe I'll start with the fiction. I tend towards nonfiction, so let me go out of my comfort zone here.
Okay.
And it's one we've talked about. It's the We Burn Daylight by
Yeah.
Brett Anthony Johnston. And we mentioned before, it's kind of like a modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet, sort of beset in Texas around the same time as the Waco siege, which was in the early 90s. And it's really interesting because Johnston intersperses like social media and podcasts into the text and into the pages. So there's, in so far that it's textual, it's also visual as well, which is really cool.
Right.
I think it's kind of, at least for my sort of millennial Gen Z brain, it makes sense to me to see news and sort of updates delivered on a screen and like context being injected via, a social media platform.
Right.
Really, I don't know my adult life without that, so it's kind of interesting that he's picked up on that. And a lot of books do that, but he did it in a way that is kind of very engaging, I guess.
Right. I thought it helped move the story along,
Totally.
and it gave you a different perspective of things, so that
Yeah.
you were kind of wondering,
yeah,
where's this
I
going to
didn't read
go?
this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Waco siege, for those that don't know, was, depending on how you interpret the entire thing, was either a crazed, cultish madman that, overstepped his freedom, or the zealotry of a government law enforcement agency that, was trying to crash the good time of people just enjoying their freedom. This book doesn't really answer that question. I
Right.
don't think it seeks to. What it does instead is it tells it from the perspective of Roy and Jay. Roy is the son of law enforcement,
Right.
kind of brought up as that type that, respects law enforcement and sees the purpose of it. And Jay is the daughter of the parents in the compound
Yeah.
that David Koresh, or in this case, the Lamb,
Well, right. Yeah.
was responsible for, or whom everybody followed. So the book, the narrative follows with each chapter, I guess, like telling it from their point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And as the book goes on, the paranoia around their relationships sort of builds, and the paranoia of how the compound is perceived builds, and it's just this. It comes to like this fever pitch sort of thing, and it's really neat because interspersed throughout all of that is this social media and then podcasting. There's this one section of the book that refers to like a podcast that's covering this story. So it's kind of like an nonlinear timeline. It kind of jumps all over the place. It's pretty cool. And I don't want to go beyond that. I think we all know how the Waco siege ended, but in terms of the microcosm that exists within this book, in terms of Roy and Jay, I'll just leave it at that. If you're familiar with Romeo and Juliet, you kind of know how this one will end too.
Yeah.
But it does have
Not
a
well.
pretty wild climax. It's
It
pretty
does,
great.
yeah. There was a good twist at the end that you wouldn't want to ruin for somebody reading.
What's it
And,
called again?
We Burn Daylight.
Oh, okay, it's that one.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
what's interesting is I'm not a romance reader. Not really much of, I don't seek it out, but if it happens, it happens, you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't go out of my way to look for that book, but I'm really happy that this was a romantic tale in the midst of such chaos,
Right.
which is I guess if I were to think of romance, it would be not that.
Yeah. And
So it's cool that-
I really liked the character of Jay because she was not portrayed as some silly little girl. She
Right.
was very astute, very savvy, made, I think some good choices and kind of protected herself, even though she was definitely the more protective one of her mom. Her mom was totally sucked into
Oh gosh, yeah,
the
and
cult.
I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of parallels with Romeo and Juliet too. I think Romeo and Juliet saw the sort of illogical ways of thinking that their families had, and they're like, why do we have to follow in lockstep with that?
Right.
They end up doing so out of loyalty to the family, and I think this kind of follows that same trajectory.
Yeah.
But the characters are, you can tell there's seeds of doubt in both of their heads where they question their upbringing, they question their environment, and what does it all mean? Sort
Right.
of thing. So
Yeah.
I would
That's
recommend it. I think it was one of my favorites at 24, and when we got brought up on the podcast earlier this year, it was like, I was immediately like, yep, I'm in. I'm into
Yeah,
that.
I think it would make a great book discussion, too.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot to unpack in that book.
There's a ton.
Yeah.
Sounds
All
good.
right. So my next one, and this one, it's weird because I rated it, I think when I read it, I rated it like 4 out of 5 stars. But I still think about this book, which to me is something that stands, at the end of the year when I'm thinking about it and thinking about what I liked, this one stood out. And it was called The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. This was a debut novel. It was speculative, which I'm not normally like a sci-fi speculative person, but this one was also kind of a coming-of-age tale. It was the story of a young woman. She's 16 years old. She's applying, it's kind of set in the future, so she's applying for like a seat on the council type of thing. And the land where they live, it's like the land to the left of them is ahead of their time, and to the right is behind their time. So that people can cross paths, and that's the whole purpose of this council, is because this is something that needs to be monitored. No one can get approval to move across time, but certain people can make applications for special events. So Odile, that was her name, is outside of school one day. She's looking and she sees a group of people, and the mask of the person comes down, and she realizes it's the parents of someone she knows, a young boy that she likes. And then the realization comes to her that they are probably looking for him because he has died. So
That's wild.
yeah.
Oh,
Like
I'm in.
that was their visit. So so then all of a sudden it's like the future, like there's a part 2 of the book, and she is not where you think she is. She's like a guardian of these borders instead of having this prestigious job of being on the council. So you're like, what happened? What happened to the guy? Where did this all end up? So to
Kind of
me,
like a mystery too. a little
yeah,
bit.
and then how the ending resolves itself. So I certainly don't want to give the ending away, but it just the whole premise of the book, like that, like being able to move backward and forward in time.
How do you write that book?
I know, and this was a debut novel.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I still think about this book, and I thought it was really cool.
Wow, it sounds really cool.
I remember liking the cover of it. It's kind of got, I don't know, like,
I think I own this one too, Sean, so I can bring it in. I'm pretty sure we bought it, but
Yeah.
if not, I'll bring it in for you.
yeah, no, I think we have it here.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads me to what I think is probably my favorite book of the year. Certainly the one I had the most fun reading. It's got time travel in it, and it's a debut author, just like the one that Claire just spoke of. It's called Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. Now, this one, if you look at Goodreads review averages like I do, it's got a little lower average than some of the other ones I'm talking about today. It's got 3.61 average compared to Playground, which was a 4.28. So that kind of tells you that maybe this isn't for everyone, but I thought this was a great book. It's like a true genre mashup. It's got the sci-fi time travel to it. There's a historical fiction element to it. It's a rom-com. The last quarter of the book has like a spy thriller vibe, and it takes place in a like very near in the future London, and it's dealing with the effects of climate change. It's either unbearably hot, flooding is happening on a regular basis to interfere with their lives, and our narrator is a young half Cambodian British woman, and she's a civil servant. She works in this huge government agency called the Ministry of Time, and the Ministry of Time is doing this top secret experiment where they are bringing back people from history, from different time periods, so that they can kind of study them. And they call these people from the past expats, and they're plucking them from like certain death in their own time period, so that in that way the kind of the fabric of history is not disturbed by them, taking them out of their own time period. And so each of these expats gets assigned a government worker, a bridge, to help them assimilate into more modern culture, somebody to kind of keep tabs on them and study them.
Like a handler.
Yes.
A handler, that's a good word.
And so our narrator, this young woman, she is the bridge for Commander Graham Gore, who is a real person in history. He was a British naval commander in the Franklin expedition, which was like a doomed Arctic expedition in the 1840s. So that's where the historical aspect comes in, because you get flashbacks from, as this doomed expedition, as he gets closer to his death, where they're actually going to come pluck him from time. You get that aspect of it, which I always found, those Arctic expeditions fascinating. I don't know why. And kind of the funny part of the book comes in from, this guy from the 1840s all of a sudden is in future London with this independent young woman, and he's like, why does she keep showing her ankles and her calves? And he's very, interested in like washing machines, and he just loves Spotify, and he's trying to wrap his head around like the fall of the British Empire, and maybe colonialism wasn't such a great thing. Right. And so that's where a lot of the humor of this book comes in. There's other expats. There's a gay soldier who was about to die in the trenches of World War I. There was a young woman from the London Plague, 1600s, who turns out she really likes Tinder. So, there's these funny things about this book. And the time travel doesn't always, it's not like an ironclad tight system, where you're like, oh, that could really happen. But that part didn't bother me. I was so entertained by the whole concept. And the way the author wrote this book, I think, is hilarious. It was during the pandemic, and so, she's stuck at home, and she started watching The Terror, which I think is an AMC thing about the Franklin expedition, and she happens upon the image of Graham Gore, who again was a real person, but not much was known about him. So there's like this one image. Sean, you should find it for the podcast. Okay. And so basically, the author kind of fell in love with this guy, as you would do during the pandemic. Let's fall in love with a guy who's been dead for a few hundred years. She's like, he has dimples and curly hair, and like he's kind of smiling. And so she was on this online group of other people who were into polar expeditions. So she started writing these kind of short little funny things like, what would happen if this guy came into our modern world? And I said, you should really continue this and write a book. So I thought this book was great. I found it really funny.
I think this was on Obama's summer reading list too.
Yeah, I think it was a Good Morning America book club pick.
Oh, I'm definitely adding that one to my list.
It's got some like great vocabulary. I really like the ending. I just thought it was fun. Like, I want a guy from the 1840s to come live with me. Like, it was fun.
All right, do you want me to go or?
Sure.
All right. Well, you know me, I'm into the dark stuff. And not because I like to know that a lot of people died or anything like that. I try to read things that help me see the world a bit more clearly, but it usually doesn't happen that way. They usually end up with more questions than I had going into it. But the second one I'm reading, or my second favorite of 24, was Challenger, A True Story of Heroism and Disaster on the Edge of Space by Adam Higginbotham. I want to say it's how you say his last name. Obviously, the Challenger disaster was in January 1986. Everybody in the country saw it. It was, up until 9/11, I think, the singular most traumatic thing that we've seen in mass.
Right.
Especially with a program and a mission that was so, I guess, far-reaching in terms of the space shuttle program and what NASA had become by the end of the Apollo missions and all that. So I went into this book seeking to understand not only more about the actual astronauts that were a part of that Challenger disaster, but also how bureaucracy can really sort of inhibit safety in a lot of different ways when it doesn't necessarily mean to. And I think those are some of the big key takeaways from this book is, the culture of an organization really is important, and even those, like in terms of their contractors and subcontractors and everybody right down to the janitor, needs to be on board with the sort of cultural mission of, at this point, NASA. So for those that don't know, Challenger was one of several space shuttles that were commissioned in the 80s at the end of the Apollo program, which went to the moon. And after Apollo wrapped up, the world context was such that the Cold War was really kicking off again. It was kind of at the end of the Cold War, and this happened after, Vietnam had ended and before nuclear crises and all that sort of thing. But American administration saw fit to have a leg up on the space race, as it were, even though it was concluded. But so the space shuttles were largely implemented to help with defense, satellites, imagery, things like that. And Challenger was one of those space shuttles. And so the way a space shuttle is, or at least how it was back in the day, with the Challenger, it was a series of little parts, that made big parts that made the whole space shuttle, the spacecraft, as it were. And so Challenger, I forget STS number, I can't remember what number it was, but it one of the two white things on the side of the rocket, if you can picture it, there's an O-ring that keeps one of those boosters intact. And what had happened was on the day of the launch, it had gotten to record cold temperatures in Florida, Cape Canaveral, to below freezing, and so all of the water vapor condensed, and it made the O-ring seal on this solid rocket booster fail.
Yeah.
So by the time Challenger broke the sound barrier or got through what's known as max Q, maximum dynamic air pressure, that seal just gave way, and a chain reaction started throughout the entire spacecraft, and that's what we saw on TV. One of the toughest parts to get through is that the Rogers Commission, the commission that investigated the crash and all that, it's speculated that the crew was alive after the initial explosion.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and that it wasn't actually the explosion that killed them. What actually killed them was the drop in cabin pressure as they were falling back to Earth. From a height of, I can't give an exact figure, but it was miles up, So that was really sort of startling to learn. And then it kind of dives into all of the lives of the astronauts, how they get to where they go, because the astronaut selection process is one of the hardest things that an American could go through.
Well, the weird thing about Challenger, too, which sticks in my brain, was Krista McAuliffe, because the teacher was selected.
Yep.
And was that a pilot at the time? Like, I don't remember having
I think she was one of the first civilian, or the first civilian.
Yeah, so in the 80s, NASA started bringing on what was known as payload specialists. They were not pilots, they weren't really scientists, they were civilians that were there to sort of drum up interest for the space program. Krista McCullough was selected as Teachers in Space or something like that, something to promote. I think she was from New Hampshire, if I recall correctly. And she was part of that. Judith Resnick was a part of it, and so there were 2 females on board, and along with I think the first Japanese space shuttle, or first Japanese American astronaut as well. I might have that wrong, but from there it goes into the bureaucracy and the culture of the time of NASA at the time. I'm going long on this, but there's so much to talk about, and I find it so interesting. But it's a worthwhile read if you're into really in-depth analysis. I think the book is like 500 pages long.
Did you read this one too?
Yeah, I didn't finish it because somebody was on hold for it. I probably got about a third of the way through, and I hadn't even really gotten to the Challenger yet. Like, you got a really in-depth kind of history of NASA, and I remember it was talking about like trying to increase diversity in NASA and like the first African American, and just like the racism and kind of like what you were saying about how all the contractors were working. I remember at one point, there was all these individual little panels. They had like thousands of them that I think they were messed up or something. So they had to replace all of them. Right. And, everything was on a timeline and a budget. And was this going to get passed, like through the government, the funding. I do want to finish it. I was in middle school when this happened, and because it was like a teacher, it was a big thing. We were watching.
I was working in a bank at the time, and you said, everybody we were all watching in the lobby with the customers and everything else. To watch this launch and.
And the ripple effect of Challenger lasted up until Columbia. When the similar thing happened with Columbia. Columbia was re-entering the atmosphere as because it found the thermal tiles on the underside of the craft had given way, and it's a really interesting book. If you're interested in American history, I think it's a good place to be. Higginbotham has another one too that I really want to read. It's this Midnight in Chernobyl, which I also got into this year because I watched the series.
Oh, the HBO
series.
That's excellent.
So again, in 1986, which is funny. So it was a kind of a big year for the world in terms of
disasters.
Yeah, older technology sort of working its way into newer technology. So this one did it for me, and I'll probably have to read it again because there's so much there.
Yeah, I do want to finish it. It was interesting. Just the fact that the whole space program was able to happen when you start reading the details. It was like the chances that they were taking from it was.
Have you ever been to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum?
Yeah, I went a few years back,
Did you go to the new one in Northern Virginia where they actually have a space shuttle?
No, I went to the whatever one's in D.C.
Okay. You got to go to that one.
Yeah, that's probably a good stopping place for me. Yeah. It's a Smithsonian, though?
Yeah, it has a different name,
Okay.
but there's like 2, and this one is in Northern Virginia. I'll get the name and everything.
Yeah, let me
A friend of
know.
mine's husband volunteers there, so.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Dream job.
All right, so I'm going to take it in a totally different direction
Please.
now. But this one was called The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I would classify it as a literary mystery. I believe I've talked about this one before. One of the real points of this one for me was that it was set in the Adirondacks, which is a place that is near and dear to my heart, and like many of us, have gone to vacation there. So also set in the 1970s, which for me was, when I was growing, up high school or whatever age, and summer of 1975, we have a daughter, Barbara Van Laar, of a very wealthy family. They own a camp, and she decides, she is going to be a camp person this year, and disappears. And then you start to find out that the family had another child that also disappeared in the Adirondack Mountains. Body was never recovered. So, and then one of the people that comes in to look at it is one of the first female New York State troopers. So you have her story of this woman trying to be taken seriously, investigate in the 70s, which was not easy, and the secrets of this family, and also the kind of dynamics of having this wealthy family own this camp, and then all the poor people really from the surrounding communities that
Yeah.
depend upon them
Who
for
live there
employment and
year-round.
everything
Yeah.
else. And
Yeah, I think Lewis County is one of the most impoverished counties in the nation for like 20 years running now.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, when you go up there, it's really something to,
yeah.
you can see these great big enormous homes and then pass a lot of things, but a lot of pride and a lot of just local culture. So so you get family secrets. I would not call this a thriller by any means. It's more of a slow burn, like I said, literary mystery where you're delving into different points of view of people involved.
Cool.
Yeah.
What made the mother the way she was, why did this girl disappear, and what happened to her older brother, who would have been her older brother,
Yeah. I read this one too, and I really liked it a lot. It was
Yeah.
probably my favorite mystery type book this year.
Yeah.
No, it was good.
All right. What you got?
Let's see. The book that most surprised me this year that I was not expecting to like as much as I did is called Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufy Thorpe. And I picked this up. It's got a bright pink cover, drawing of a young blonde woman who's just kind of lying there looking like she is done with life. The blurb, had some stuff about Hooters waitresses and OnlyFans and pro wrestling. So I was expecting like this bit of fluff with some seedy undercurrents, which, it did have that, but it was a really quirky, funny book that was a lot more like heartwarming than I thought it would be. It's about a 20-year-old Margot who has an affair with her much older community college English professor, who I believe was married.
Yes, I think he was.
And, did you end up reading this?
I started it.
You
I
started it.
haven't- yeah.
Okay. She ends up getting pregnant. Against everyone's advice, she decides to keep the baby and soon discovers you cannot juggle an infant, taking care of an infant. She's a waitress, so she has, odd hours, so she can't find childcare, and she can't afford rent, food, so she starts an OnlyFans account.
Yeah, I learned what that was.
Yeah, you want to tell us what that is?
No.
Yeah,
You brought this book up, Molly. You go
kind
there.
of an online adult site where you try to get subscribers to make money. So she starts this account to try to make ends meet. And what I thought the best part of this book was the relationship between her father, who was largely an absent figure in her life. He used to be a pro wrestler. He's got some addiction issues. I think he needs somewhere to stay, so he ends up coming back into Margot's life, living with her and helping take care of his grandchild. Since he has this kind of wild entertainment background in wrestling, he helps her grow her OnlyFans base. And just like the decisions that these people make, it kind of challenges some of the assumptions you might have about like class and education and sex work, and like they're making these choices and you're thinking, what are you doing? And you feel like you should be rooting against them, but somehow like these characters, like you kind of fall in love with them, and you're like, she is doing the best she can. Like what is right, trying to figure out what is right to do for her daughter and her family. And like, I was surprised by this book. I did not expect it to be quite so like hard hitting or like real.
It's funny because everyone I've heard talk about this book, like on different podcasts and everything, have said the same thing.
Yeah.
Like they really did not expect to like it from the premise, thought it was going to be something completely different, and were shocked at how much they felt for these
Yeah.
characters.
I was like, go Margot, like get those OnlyFans, make that money, like come
those subs.
on. And I'm like, yeah, the pro wrestler, yeah. I mean, it was good.
Yeah, I love a good humanizing tale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's wild because that is the plight of a lot of people right now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, not saying it's right or wrong, but it's what happens.
Right.
And
And this book kind of challenges whatever assumptions you might have about it, or like judgments, or
yeah.
it's like, okay, that's how that could happen. I can see that.
There's a market for everything, which is what I'm learning.
Do you have another one, or you want us to jump and save
How
you?
many more do you have?
I think we were just going to each talk about one more.
Yeah.
All right,
I
fine.
mean, we could go on for hours.
I'll make
but-
this one real quick because it's dark. Nuclear War, a scenario
Oh,
by
yeah.
Annie Jacobson. It's a minute by minute you could say speculation. You might say it's pretty close to what will probably happen. A minute by minute breakdown of what would happen in the event of a nuclear first strike against the United States, and the standard military response and branches of decision making that would happen in that event. It would most likely be North Korea starting it, and then Russia would get confused, and then we'd launch our missiles at Russia, then not knowing until it was North Korea that actually did it, and so all of our missiles are up at Russia, all theirs are coming at us, and all the rest of them it's like this three-way volley, and everybody's going to get involved after that. And one of the key takeaways I'll take from it, aside from it being just engrossing book, nuclear war at that rate would last no longer than 2 hours and would result in hundreds of millions killed, and the earth would be uninhabitable for 24,000 years.
Wow.
So Annie Jacobson's takeaway, how I interpret it, was the balance of power in people and decision making is very delicate, and the fate of humanity can be steered by one person. So choose your leaders wisely.
I actually find that a little comforting, like 2
Yeah.
hours, like,
Yeah, it won't be
because
drawn
I
out.
feel like the anxiety I would feel, if anything were to happen, would be like, okay, 2 hours, like, it's done.
Yeah.
What cracks me up is the old bomb things when I was little in elementary school, like hiding under our desk.
Yeah.
Really? That's not going to do anything.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
even in kindergarten, you're
Yeah.
like, something doesn't quite seem
Yeah.
right about this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that hindsight is very 2020, and it's if you that's all the detail I'll give you, but it's a short book because it's kind of a short conflict.
Right.
But it's clear that she went and did a lot of research for preparing this narrative. Then she says this is only one way it could happen.
Right, it's one
But this
scenario.
would be probably the most likely based on all the data and information she was able to gather from United States military, nuclear physicists, things like that. But this is maybe telling of my personality. I'm chuckling kind of
I know.
throughout it, because it's like, well, if there's one thing that's truly out of our control, out of anybody's control at that point, it's that. So
Yeah.
hey, I
Buckle up.
might as well read my 117th book in that 2 hours. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got no control over it.
No. And that's a book that I have seen mentioned on multiple lists. And one guy, I just thought it was funny. He said it was scarier than any horror story that he's ever
this
read.
is real horror.
Yeah.
Like real horror are stories about your roof caving in,
Right.
not the boogeyman or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
Not things that go bump in the night. It's, do I need a new water heater this week? That's scary as hell.
Yeah.
So I'll leave you with that.
Okay.
All right. My next one, I think this to me was literary mystery, must have been my go-to, my genre this year. So my favorite book overall was called All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. And I won't talk about it too much because I talked about it earlier this season, but I love this book. It was a mystery. It was a multi-layered love story. It was a coming-of-age story about a boy that grew into a man that just had a singular mission. And the there were two main characters, Patch and Saint. They were friends in childhood, both kind of like outcast, geeky sorts.
As all the best people are.
That's right. That's what we were. So yes, absolutely.
As all the librarians
Yeah.
were.
But a young popular girl is almost abducted, and Patch, who wears an eye patch, actually stopped it and then ended up getting taken himself. So the story is how this abduction that almost happened to the girl affected her and the town, and then what happened to him and how his family, his single mom, his best friend, who was on a mission to save him, and she will not let anyone forget him, whether it's the police chief or anybody else, because you come to find out, like, a young, beautiful blonde girl from a wealthy family, everybody cares about her. They're all glad that she's okay. You know, the kid from the other side of the tracks with a single mom that people don't even know if she's a drunk or not, you
Right.
know, him, not so much.
Yeah, yeah.
But Saint, you know, I really liked her. She just kept going. She just kept pushing, and you know.
Is this one like a 70s, 80s one too?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Same time frame.
What is it? It reminds me of that movie by the Coen brothers that came out a few years ago.
I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't mean to interrupt, but
That's okay.
it reminds me. I'm wondering if it draws from that. Anyway, go ahead.
But anyway, small town vibes, very satisfying, pretty much conclusion. It doesn't give you, like, you know, Saint and Patch. This isn't going to be a love affair between them. This is two people that were very good friends, and you know, she actually becomes a police officer because of this to investigate things. So, yeah, this one was just my favorite book of the year. It's kind of hard to put into words as to why I liked it so much, but I think it was a combination of the characters, the setting, and the fact that it wasn't like a cookie cutter type of thing.
Yeah, this is definitely on my list of things to read because I've heard several people really speak highly of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a lot of depth to it, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll quickly, this is probably one you've all heard before, James by Percival Everett. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book this year, but I thought it was very good. It just won the National Book Award for Best Fiction.
Did it win the Pulitzer too?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know National Book Award.
All right.
It's a retelling of the classic by Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I never read. I'm going to blame that on Rush Henrietta Schools because they never assigned it to me. I would have read it if they had because I was a good girl. But you don't need to have read the original to enjoy it. It's told from the point of view of Jim, the enslaved character. He's a husband and a father. He lives in Missouri before the Civil War. And when he learns that he is going to be sold away from his wife and daughter, he escapes. And of course, he ends up traveling down the Mississippi River with none other than Huck Finn, who's the 10-year-old boy who faked his own death to get away from his abusive father. So this had some funny elements to it. It was very clever with like wordplay and language because, you know, it is mainly about slavery. It also is difficult to read at times. But I thought this was really well done. It's not going to be the last time you hear about it. I guess Universal has acquired the film rights. They say Steven Spielberg is slated to be the executive producer along with the author. I think, you know, if you're in a book club, they're probably going to pick this. And I know for a lot of people, myself included, like sometimes these, you know, really highly reviewed, you know, winner of book awards, things don't always gel with me. It makes me feel like maybe if I were a little smarter or had, I don't know, majored in English, not spent so much time playing Farmville and killing my brain cells, like maybe I would have liked this more. But James, I don't feel like is like that. It's accessible. It's not real long. I think it's enjoyable whether you know anything about the classic book or not. So I would recommend picking it up even if you don't think award winners are your style.
I read this one too, and kind of like you, I don't think I gave it a 5 because some of it made me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The thing I thought was interesting is the way James almost used 2 different languages.
Yeah, code switching.
2%. Yeah, so he literally switched like between what his master thought he should sound like and what he sounded like then versus, and they actually had like words to signal, like, oh, you got to switch. You got, and, you know, I found that a little fascinating, and just the relationship between he and Huck
yeah.
blew me away. And just the different people they met and everything.
Yeah,
it made
kinda
me
like
want to
madcap
revisit,
adventures.
you know, but I have not yet.
Yeah, I should read it.
Yeah.
So I'm not a failure as a librarian, but will I? Because now I have to read Colors of the Dark. I have to read about the nuclear war. I have to finish Chancellor. There's so many
Percival
books.
Everett, though, didn't he have a movie that was a book that was made into a movie last year that
He has-
wasn't the same type of, wasn't the same
I
title?
think so, but he has written a lot of things, and
Yeah.
somehow I have never read any of it. So
I think this was the first one.
yeah,
'Cause I went and rebought the book. The book was much older. Erasure.
Oh, that's what I see here too. Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't, the movie wasn't.
2001.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
book
he's
was
been around a
older,
while.
but the movie just came out and it had a different title, but
Gotcha.
it was based on that book.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I would recommend it.
Yeah.
American fiction.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff coming up in 2025 too. So
Yeah.
we'll have to.
and on that note,
yeah.
I am going to be doing a episode in early January about books I'm looking forward to in 2025 with Megan the Page, who
nice.
is in library school, avid reader, and she is going to be joining me. So I
Sounds
think
good.
that will be very fun. That'll be our next episode.
That's in January.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. We're already the holiday
you-
season's here.
I know. Can you believe
La
it?
la la.
So we hope everyone has a happy holiday season. We hope you get some good books in your stocking, and let us know what some of your favorites were and if you agree with our choices. And we will see you in 2025.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Book Break is a production of the Greece Public Library, made possible through the support of the Friends of the Greece Public Library. Theme music composed and performed by Sean Greif.